and start webinar. Okay, so we're just gonna start letting people in, and I will get my intro. Okay, hello everyone, and start webinar. Okay, what's that? Right. Sorry everyone, I'm just doing some fiddly bits from my end so that I can, yeah, there we go. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to the Stay at Home Fest. This is our penultimate day, I guess, which is very sad. And I am really pleased and excited this evening to be hosting this panel with two fabulous debut novels. So I'm going to introduce Fíona Scarlett and Christina Sweeney-Baird to you all. So Fíona Scarlett is from Dublin's fair city, but is now living in County Kildare with her husband and two children. She holds an MLitt in creative writing with distinction from the University of Glasgow, was awarded the Denis O'Driscoll Literary Bursary for an emerging writer through Kildare County Council 2019, and a Literature Bursary through the National Arts Council Ireland 2020. She works full-time as a primary school teacher, and her debut novel, Boys Don't Cry, is published by Faber Faber. It's just been published in spring 2021. So welcome, everyone. Please welcome Fíona. Christina Sweeney-Baird was born in 1993 and grew up in North London and Glasgow. Hooray! She studied law at the University of Cambridge and graduated with a first in 2015. She works as a corporate litigation lawyer in London, and The End of Men is her first novel. I am Carolyn Jess Cook. I am the founder and director of the Stay at Home Literary Festival. And I'm in a very unique position because I actually teach creative writing at the University of Glasgow. So I taught Fíona and had the very rare privilege of seeing this book, Boys Don't Cry, as it was being drafted. So this is a really lovely event. And we also have something very significant to discuss with your novel as well, Christina. Not so much in our connection, but in the novel's prescience, shall we say, and its connection, not a deliberate connection, but a connection to COVID. Reading it is a very unique experience. So, so welcome to you both. So how are you both doing today? How does it feel to have your novels out in the world just recently? It must be still buzzing.
It's quite magical. I have to say, I did have to like resist the urge to just go into all of the bookshops again today to just like see the book. Yeah. I had anyone that is having a book published now, I think is very fortunate where we actually are able to go into books. Yeah. And it was given, so I do feel just so lucky. Yeah, it feels quite surreal.
Okay, and I just thought, you know, because these are your debut novels, I thought I would take a moment just to sort of ask you a little bit about, you know, where the ideas came from. You know, a debut novel, I think, is something very special. So I suppose I'd like to start with you, Fíona. Is that okay? In talking about this book, like I said, I got to see some early drafts of it, but do tell us a little bit about the book and where your ideas came from.
Yeah, so the book is set in inner city Dublin and it centres around two brothers. So there's 12-year-old Finn and 17-year-old Joe, and it's dual narrative. So Finn is detailing the events leading up to a tragedy, and then Joe is detailing the events in the aftermath of this tragedy. So the spark of inspiration for this came from, it was a tweet from a palliative care doctor, a paediatric palliative care doctor, about 3 years ago. And I was in the middle of doing the MLitt at the time. And the tweet basically was, he and his nurses had asked children in his care what they'd missed the most when they died. So it was an incredibly moving and powerful tweet. And the first thing I did after I read that was I opened up the laptop and I wrote the first chapter of the book. And I'd say that chapter is practically identical. It hasn't really changed at all from the very, very beginning. And it's probably one of the only things that's more or less exactly intact as it was. So that's where the sort of spark of the story came. And then the other inspiration is my own father. So he grew up in inner city Dublin, just off Dorset Street. And when he was about 10 or 11, his father signed him up. There was a man right in the heart of the city giving free music lessons for children in the area, and signed up my dad and his brother. And that became, they ended up then getting a scholarship for music in the local College of Music. And basically music was everything to my dad, and it was his life. And he went on then in his mid-30s, he trained as a secondary school teacher, music secondary school teacher, and worked in our community, in a disadvantaged school in our community, trying to give the same opportunities to children in his care that he was given himself. So there's a lot of my father is in the book as well. So that's the background behind it.
That's so wonderful. It's so interesting that you say it sort of began with that tweet, but you know, obviously you've been, because I do think that sometimes that spark that you get, and as you say, it just sort of came out that first chapter, that spark, there's been something mulling. You've been, you know, mulling the themes over, and maybe the setting and all of those ideas. So it just takes that sort of catalyst to sort of, you know, fuse everything together. That's so interesting. What about you, Christina? I mean, because The End of Men, something I really love about this book is how ideas, it's just bursting with ideas, because the premise is extraordinary, and I'll let you sort of speak to that a little bit. But the premise is extraordinary, but one of the things I was really curious about when I was reading was how, or when I was beginning to read, was how you were going to imagine it, because there's a lot of logistics to work out and to imagine, and for you to be you're writing this pre-COVID, and I've turned down some pages where you mentioned things like patient zero and terms that we're now familiar with, that, you know, that are in this book that was written previous. It's very spooky to read, but it must have been a really, I don't know how to describe that experience you must have had of being working on this book, and then seeing everything, well, not everything, but a lot of the things that are in here unfold. So could you tell us where your idea came from?
Yes, so The End of Men.
Sorry, Christina, sorry to just to cut in, but your sound's a wee bit funny. I'm just wondering if it's I'm not sure why. Just we wanted to hear you.
Is that better or no?
Yeah, that seems better. It was going in and out, so I thought I better stop you. Sorry, try it again.
So The End of Men explores the question, what would the world look like without men? So in the book, virus.
Oh dear, Christina, I'm so sorry. This is awful. We're losing you again. I don't know what the problem is. It's not just me, is it? Is everyone having this problem?
Yeah, it's cutting out a bit here as well.
Yeah. I think this might be a Wi-Fi issue.
Oh no.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see, no problem. And then so you start to talk and it seems fine, but then it cuts out. Oh, it's just
okay.
Technology.
Let's try one more time. So can you hear me now when I'm talking, or no?
Yeah, I can hear you. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So The End of Men explores the question. There's now a siren, so this is going really, really well.
Hear the siren, so it's okay.
So there's a virus to which women are immune that quickly wipes out 90% of the male population. And so the book is told through a number of different characters with first-person perspectives. So you get to really see from different people's, kind of lives and experiences how the world would change if there was this enormous pandemic that only affected men. And so that central question of the book, what would the world look like without men, was really where the idea started from. And I had recently read The Power by Naomi Alderman, which I think really made me think about using speculative fiction to explore gender in a way that I hadn't really ever thought about doing. And I knew that I had the idea, what would it look like without men? And I kind of thought, I really want to read that book. I don't think that book exists, so I think I'm going to write it. And then in the process of writing, there was kind of two elements to it. In many ways, the fact that it is a pandemic novel is kind of coincidental insofar as the pandemic in the book is really a means to an end. I wanted a feasible way for the population to change so I could explore that thought experiment. And so in some ways it is quite ironic that it's now obviously a book about a pandemic that is being published into the pandemic. But a lot of those terms that you mentioned, patient zero, social distancing, those are all terms that are present in public health literature. And obviously we've never had a pandemic in our lifetime quite like COVID, but pandemics are, they're nothing new. If you look at books like MLitt by Maggie O'Farrell, for example, you're going back many, many centuries, there have always been pandemics. So there's that element of the book, but I think also that I really wanted to make sure that I had thought through as much as I could about how the world would change in this very specific way when you only have one, when only men are the ones at risk. And I think that there's two elements to that. There's the practical, what does the world look like? How does a hospital, for example, how is a hospital impacted? What would happen to Parliament? How would it be different in the US or the UK or in different countries? But then also the emotional ramifications. And I think hopefully when people read the book, they feel very engaged with characters. You have this thing of kind of people being at risk. Is this person's husband or son or friend going to survive? And so it really also, I think, looks at what the world would feel like if you were not necessarily at risk, but lots of those close to you were. So I think that the book is, it is hopefully very ideas filled. I really enjoyed writing it. It felt like this kind of very rich world building exercise. But then also hopefully it's kind of grounded in characters that you really care about.
Of course, yeah. No, I mean, one of the characters that I particularly loved was Amanda, who is based in Glasgow. She's an A&E doctor, or the Independent Republic of Scotland. Again, a really interesting idea that you put forward. And she's the one who discovers the existence of the plague, and she's kind of gaslit for trying, she really tries to alert people, but she gets gaslit. And so that kind of frustration and the fact that she's such an intelligent, determined figure up against quite extreme odds. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about her character and how you devised her, and maybe what research you had to do.
So it felt to me, so I grew up between London and Glasgow. And so to me, I always feel like that advice of write what you know is kind of impossible, especially if you're a speculative or fantasy author. But it's really nice to ground an idea that it does require a huge suspension of disbelief in something that you do know. And so I really wanted to start the story in Glasgow. A lot of my kind of, the parents of my friends when I was growing up were doctors. And I know a woman who has I think shades of Amanda. She's very wry and no nonsense, and her son would have to be dying before she'd take him to hospital. She's an A&E doctor, and she would just be walk it off, you'll be fine, just walk it off. And be I think it's pneumonia, and she'd be walk it off. So there's that kind of quite no nonsense figure, I think, is part of it that felt to be quite uniquely Glaswegian. And so that I really enjoyed starting the story, I think, with someone who was that competent and kind of together. But then also it made sense to me that potentially, and I think this is one of those things where I think real life has unfortunately showed that this wasn't quite as unrealistic as I thought it was, that if someone says, look, I've put pieces together and I think there is this huge thing and it's really dangerous, there is a pandemic, that often people go, is there though? I don't think so. Are you sure? How do you know? Are you sure? Are you sure you're not just over exaggerating this? And so it felt feasible to me. In an ideal world, of course, Amanda would see patient zero, put the dots together, and then she kind of hopes in the book, the men in the hazmat suits will come charging in. But unfortunately, that's not actually how it works in reality. So I wanted there to be a very competent, capable person at the centre of it, but unfortunately, she's not listened to.
But even, I mean, because you imagine the global effects, you think about, you cover political kind of upheaval and the workforce, and there's a dating app. There's so many, and I did wonder, was that not really, really tough to kind of manage in terms of, because I'm thinking even in terms of, well, this is your debut, but I'm thinking of people who are interested in writing, a novel is such a challenging form because you have all the different kind of narrative threads to keep hold of, and the sort of rules. I always think of the rules of the world that you've built, and it's not just fantasy that applies to. It's any world within the story. The internal logic has to be strong and consistent. And I'd love to know more from you about how you managed that, or was it a challenge that you really just enjoyed?
So the honest answer is that it took 2 drafts. And I say that partly because I think it's comforting for people to know that I'm always someone who thinks I'm going to be able to do a perfect first draft. And of course, that's not how it works. But the first draft I did was unrecognizable to this book, really. The story of the plague was the same, but it was really a world building draft. So each of the characters only appeared once. So literally, it was kind of like 40 different short stories, essentially, kind of hung together in the structure chronologically, you know, showing basically how the plague had affected the world. And so I then signed with my agent on the basis of that draft, and she said, this is a really good idea, and I really like your writing, but we have to make this actually more of a novel as opposed to what it currently is. And so at that point, we winnowed it down to these core characters, people like Amanda, who's a doctor, and Catherine, who has a husband and a young son and is a social anthropologist, people that really you could tell the story through. But I mean, I think about 90% of that first draft got cut, you know, properly gonzo, like, you know, on the cutting room floor. So the answer is that I didn't manage it very well on my own. But through that rewrite process, by having 2 drafts, the world building draft, and then a lot of that world building was then fed in to the second draft, but through the eyes of kind of a smaller number of characters. That was really how I did it. And I'm working on the 3rd draft of my second novel now. And I have found actually that with speculative fiction, I just think it's very difficult to do both. I think it's very difficult to have an engaging emotional narrative alongside deep, rich world building at the same time. And if someone has managed to do that in one draft from the get-go, I'm very impressed by it, but I've so far not figured out how to.
Well, gosh, I love how you think you're comforting anyone by saying you did it in just 2 drafts. So I'll tell you how many drafts I do my stuff in. It seems that I take more drafts the more I write. So yeah, but that's phenomenal and really, really impressive. Fíona, can I come to you now? I know that you you know, yours is not speculative fiction, it's a different genre, but you work full time, you've got young kids, and I am curious about your kind of research process, or your kind of creative practice, what it looked like as you're writing this.
Yeah, so the opening of this book, so there was 20,000 words that I had to submit as part of the MLitt for the portfolio. So that was the opening 20,000 of this, and that was sort of polished within an inch of its life to submit as part of that. So like that, because I work, because I have kids, I'm not somebody who writes every day. Like I just can't. I find the time when I can, and I use the time when I can, and that's the way that I write. And with me as well, I edit as I go. I find it really, really hard just to put everything down. So it was a bit like what you were saying as well, Carolyn, that even though that tweet sparked this story, like it was there. It was the fact that it just sort of came nearly fully formed, the idea of the story. Yeah. And with me, I have to have the story in my head before I begin. So I don't write anything down. I didn't have any notes or anything at all like that, but I do have to have the story clear in my head. And at the beginning, I was going to write it about Finn and his ma, Annie. But actually, when I went down to the laptop to write, it was Joe that just came out. So that's how it happened. And I didn't write it in sequence, but I did write it with the 2 of them together. So it was always Finn and Joe alternating together when I was writing the section. So I wrote the beginning, then I went and I wrote the end, and then I went to little bits in the middle. So that's how I did it. And that is one thing that I will say. I think that advice that's out there that you have to write every day is actually can damage a lot of confidence, and it can put extra guilt on you. And especially when you're a mother and you're taking your free time that you have with your kids, you're up in your room writing or you're doing whatever, you don't need any extra guilt. So like nobody's going to write it for you. You do have to just sit down and write it. But I think there's a lot of privilege in saying you have to write every day. Maybe that's just me, but yeah, so
I don't write every day. So I hear you.
So I suppose it's like, if you want to do it, it's the same as anything. If you want to do it, you will make the time to do it, but you just have to juggle a bit more, I'd say. Yeah. Like I found even with the lockdown and everything like this, because this sold at the start of the lockdown, and my agent had actually said maybe we'll pull it because everything had just locked down and we didn't know what way it was going to go, and will we resubmit again in September, we thought, when things are going to be back to normal again. And it sold. It was around the end of March where we got the phone call to say that it had sold. So it's been a very strange couple of months, and here our bookshops aren't open here yet. We're still in full lockdown, so we're hoping that things will start opening up again soon. So
oh my gosh,
I haven't seen it out in the wild yet. People have sent me photos of it in places where they've seen it, but I haven't actually physically seen it in a shop yet.
Oh, that's really tough. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really tough for, I suppose, all writers, but I really do feel for debut novelists, you know, getting to this point and then having this kind of situation where you can't get it, you can't even see it in bookstores, or they're completely shut. I just to return a little bit to what you were saying in terms of, you know, how you write. I'd love to know more about both of your writing journeys, because, you know, I've spoken to a lot of different writers and they have such different, the range of different, you know, ways that people have come to their debut novel. I've spoken to novelists who had written 12 full novels before publishing their debut, and then, you know, you've other people and it's literally the first thing they've ever written. So, and I know you were doing the MLitt, Fíona, you know, so obviously you're a very accomplished writer already. Had you written novels before, or what was your kind of journey?
Yeah, so I'm not somebody who always wanted to be a writer. Like when I grew up, writing wasn't even on my radar. I didn't think it was something that I could do. Like I absolutely loved reading. I read a lot and I loved English in school, but I loved the plays in particular. And I think the reason I love the plays is because I'm heavily drawn to character and dialogue. Like I love film as well. So it wasn't on the radar at all. I did music, was what I did, my undergraduate, and then I went on to do primary school teaching. And I'd say it was probably about 35-ish when I was there going, do you know something, I think I want to write. I don't know where that kernel came from. Like I was always drawn to story, like in all its forms, like that, film and chatting and gossip and books or whatever it is. So always drawn to that. So I suppose it was always there. It was just wasn't something that I thought was something realistically that I could do. So I remember then when I was about 35, said, okay, I'm going to give this a go and see what happens. And I started writing for children. So because I had 2 young kids, I was working as a primary school teacher. So I was in that world all the time. So when I started the MLitt, it was such a humorous middle grade is what I was writing at the time. And I had never completed a novel. And the reason I did the MLitt, like you do not have to have a master's in creative writing to get published, like absolutely not. But for me, I had no confidence in my writing. I wanted to see, it was more like a test for myself to see, did I have what it took to be a writer? And if at the end of it, you know, it was a fact where people said, no, actually, you can't write or you can't do this, that would have been grand. You know, it was just to see if I had what it took. It was something that I really wanted to do. And also I didn't have any background in English, like I didn't do English in college or any of these type of things. So for me, it gave me just the confidence to pursue it. And especially with Glasgow, Carolyn, like when I was looking to do a master's here, it had to be part-time because I wasn't in a position to be able to give up my job. And here, part-time masters in creative writing, the lectures were all on in the morning. So like, it just wasn't feasible if you're working to be able to do it. And it was my sister, she said, oh, do you know, they have I think they have a distance learning module in Glasgow. She lives in Glasgow, my sister. So luckily it was that. And in Glasgow, they encourage you to experiment outside what you're writing and push it outside of your comfort zone. So if I hadn't have done that, if I hadn't have done the MLitt, I would never have come to this book. You know, it was just the way that everything sort of fell into place or came at the right time or something like that. So yeah, that's how I came to it. So it's definitely in a roundabout way come to it. So the reading and the love of story was always there, but not the wanting to be a writer.
Yeah, it's really interesting because both these books are very filmic. I'm curious to know if the film rights have been sold, but both of them, you know, have this really super filmic. So it's interesting. Just when you said about plays, I can really see that in here because the way you said it, I feel like I'm watching a film, and I love those kinds of books. So these were just especially enjoyable to read. And if I can come to you, Christina, you know, you work as a litigation lawyer, so presumably you had to kind of mold your writing around things. Can you talk a wee bit about how you did that? Because I'm always fascinated how people do that, because, you know, sometimes you get this thing of people saying, well, I don't have time to write. But the stories I've heard from various writers saying, you know, I had one novelist on the other day, and she was saying she started writing when her kids were little, and she would set her alarm at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. to get up and write until 4 a.m. And I just, you know, because she said that was hot, that was the only time she had. So it's really interesting that it's, you know, we have to make that time. So how did you make that time?
Yeah, so it's something where I always loved writing, but was quite secretive about it. I've never done any creative writing training, and I studied law at university, and I really wanted to. I'm very.
I'm sorry, that was my phone.
It's okay, don't worry.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I was always like trying to write the beginnings of novels. I really love novels, and that's really the thing I always knew I wanted to write. And so I kind of beat myself up a lot over like my teens and my early 20s because I could never finish a novel. And with hindsight, I just didn't know enough. And I also didn't have enough bandwidth. I found it very difficult when I was at university. I studied law and it was like really intense. And the idea of fitting in like writing around that was just nonsensical. So I find it kind of ironic when I say that it was only when I started working as a corporate litigation lawyer in the city that I finally, for the first time, actually had a job where, you know, when you're studying, it never stops, right? You can always be reading or thinking more about what you're doing. But when I was working, at least it was like, I have a weekend and I can plan around my evenings. So I started writing my first novel that I was like, I'm going to finish this when I was 23, and I started working as a lawyer, and I was like, I'm giving myself 2 years, that which is like the length of the training contract you do to become a lawyer. And I mean, that's basically how I learned to write a novel. That was a completely different novel to The End of Men. It was somewhat ironically a historical romance novel, which I know seems quite a shift from The End of Men. But I actually think that it makes more sense when you think about it, because I often say that if you don't know where to start, then often writing in genre fiction, I think, is a good place to start. I read a lot of historical romance. That's my like comfort reading. And so there's kind of a frame, I think, to work within. You know roughly how this story is meant to be structured. And basically I kind of, that writing that book was a bit of a mess. Like I kept not knowing what to do with the plot, but I kind of battled my way through. And in the process of writing that book, I had the idea of The End of Men. But it means that I suppose I've always, in terms of writing, I have literally, you know, I would say I've been writing seriously since I was 23 at that point, which was now 5 years ago. And so I've always fitted it in around law. And for me, I'm a night owl, which is very helpful. The idea of getting up early in the morning to write genuinely fills me with horror. But I just cannot do it. So I tip my hat to anyone who manages that. But it is, I mean, I completely agree with this idea that telling everyone that you have to write every day is quite problematic. You know, I would say there are no prizes for how you get the writing done. The prize is getting the writing done. And I talk about chaos sometimes. I feel like people often have this idea that it has to be quite calm and very structured and regimented. And the fact is that 2,000 words written at 2 o'clock in the morning and then not writing for 2 days and managing to write another 4,000 is as good as writing, you know, 500 words a day every morning at 6 o'clock. What the point is getting the work done. And so I think for me, it was committing to it and treating it like a job long before anyone else does. You know, you have to write for quite a long time for anyone's paying you. And so you have to really commit to it, I think, in your own head. And for me, I do find momentum is important. It's so easy to get lost in the center of a novel. You're like 40,000 words in and you've still got so much to do, and you just think, how on earth are we going to keep going? So for me, I'd use a lot of like writing trackers to make it means you can visually see I have made progress, even if it doesn't feel like I've made progress. And I try and write 500 to 1,000 words a day if I can. But yeah, it's basically late night writing, committing to it. And then also, as you know, just writing when you can and not beating yourself up if it's not working as quickly as you wanted it to, or if, you know, you haven't written for the weekend, just kind of pick yourself back up the next day and keep going. And then like, it is always worth it, I think, in the end.
Well, I think those are great words. I think especially to anyone who is interested in trying something as challenging as a novel. I do love this quote, and I can't really, I think it might have been Sarah Waters, but it's this, I think she said, a novel is not written, it is inched along. And I really love that, because it's true. It's not written. It never feels like you're sitting and you're writing whatever is, this is a great writing day sometimes can be very far and few between the days that are just slogs. And I like what you say about commitment. You're completely right. It is about that, just, you know, plowing on with it. And not worrying if you haven't written, you know, every day, or in my case, it's been about a couple of months. So so yeah, those are all words of comfort and hope, I think. I wonder, would you mind, Christina, reading us a little bit from the novel? There's so many great excerpts, so I'll let you decide what you'd like to read.
So I'm going to read a bit from the second chapter, which is the first introduction we get to Amanda McLean. So you kind of get to see what is happening. Amanda, Glasgow, United Kingdom, day 1. November is always busy, but this is ridiculous. The area around Gartnavel has never shown its divisions more apparently. The ice-induced falls and chesty coughs of Glasgow's polished middle-class West End residents appear in A&E in a flurry of expensive highlights, knowledge of different kinds of antibiotics, and clipped accents, making clear they want their parents and grandparents to be seen now. The other side of this tale of two cities is liver cirrhosis, chronic poverty, and the unglamorous side effects of a life of smoking. It's another SLS, Kirsty, an excellent young nurse, says gaily to me as she swings past me, unceremoniously plonking a chart into my arms. Shit life syndrome. Doctors speak for, there's actually nothing wrong with you. You're just really sad because your life is really, really hard, and there's nothing I can do about that. I used to try and help, little naive waif that I was. What if they have nobody else? I would think desperately to myself as I phoned social services 7 times in one night until they stopped answering me. As a consultant, my approach is a bit different. Why am I seeing them then? I ask. This is a waste of my time, a classic shit junior doctor task if there ever was one. They've specifically asked to see a consultant and won't talk to anyone else. Unfair as it is, being loud, insistent, and generally a pain in the arse will often get you better care in hospital. Not because we respect those kinds of antics, we just want to get you out the door. I walk into the cubicle, the curtain providing a thin semblance of privacy. What can I do for you? I ask in my special chirpy but curt voice that I save for the healthy in my overcrowded, underfunded A&E department. He's no well, the pasty woman to my left growls, pointing at a child who, whilst bored, looks to be in rude health. What appears to be the problem? I ask, sitting in front of him. From his notes, I can see his vitals are all normal. He doesn't even have a temperature, he's fine. He keeps sleeping till late and he's got a cough. The child has literally not made a sound. A few harmless questions later, and all is revealed. He's going through a growth spurt and tried a cheeky cigarette on the way home from school with a fellow wayward friend. Somebody called Sherlock. I have a gift. As I'm waving the sheepish boy and his mother out the door, I hear the ring of the trauma phone. I take the call. A 2-month-old child suspected sepsis on the way in. There's an adrenaline rush when the phone rings for an incoming trauma that even after 20 years as a doctor, I'm never immune to. After 45 minutes of breathless work stabilising the baby, he's being whisked upstairs to the ICU. There's barely a moment to turn around and think before another trauma comes in. This one's more routine. A road traffic collision has resulted in some nasty gashes and suspected internal bleeding. I'm washing my hands and trying to remember what time my son's parents' evening starts when one of my first-year junior doctors grabs me. She's babbling about a patient crashing who had been fine and now he's not fine and help. She's a mess. I've seen it so many times before. She's only been on the ward for 10 weeks and she has a patient deteriorating and she's panicking. I know I should be respectful and aware of the fact that she's only a junior doctor and we all have to learn, but really it's just annoying. I can understand a lack of knowledge and I can tolerate the mistakes made due to exhaustion, but sheer panic in an A&E department is as useful as a papier-mâché boat with a trapdoor. If you can't keep your head screwed on when a patient's crashing, then an area of medicine devoted to emergencies is not for you. I run with her back to the cubicle. The patient's wife is standing next to the bed with him crying. I practically hiss at Fiona to get him into recess and ask as quietly and furiously as possible why he isn't there already. Even a cursory look at this man and his vitals shows you that he's seriously unwell. Jesus, you don't even need to look at him. Every machine is beeping in persistent, whining concern. Fiona says he had the flu and he was fine when he arrived, just fine. She gave him fluids and paracetamol and had clearly hoped that he'd go away after a while, having been convinced it was in fact just the flu and nothing more. By this point, the patient is dying. His breathing is laboured with the shallow pant of a body not coping with the basic requirements of taking in air. His skin has the grey pallor of someone whose bodily systems are shutting down, and his temperature is climbing higher and higher. There are now 7 members of staff surrounding him. Matron is taking his temperature at 2-minute intervals and announcing, with barely disguised disbelief, that it's climbing this quickly. We strip him and surround him with ice and cold towels. I examine his entire body looking for a wound, an insect bite, a shaving cut, a scratch, anything that could be causing sepsis. There's nothing. No rash, so meningitis is unlikely. By this point, I'm starting to think he's past the point of no return. There's not a huge amount you can do once the organs start shutting down. We catheterize him, give him fluids and oxygen. We pump him full of massive amounts of antibiotics and antivirus to start fighting whatever it is that's burning him up. We take bloods to screen for infection, and if he can at least survive until we get those back, we can tailor the drugs we're giving him, but now his kidneys are shutting down. There's 0 urine output. The bag under the bed from the catheter is flapping in the air, depressingly empty. I often tell my friends when they half-jokingly ask me if they're dying, if you still need to pee, you're fine. As I stand back and watch the scene unfolding in front of me, I keep my face arranged in an expression of grave calm. He's a handsome lad, dark hair, stubble across his chin. He looks kind. His wife keeps getting in the way, crying, inconsolable. She occasionally shouts at us to do more, but there's nothing more she can do but wait and hope that by some miracle his body will turn itself around. 3 hours after he arrived in A&E, the machine we've all been waiting for begins its long shriek. His heart has stopped. In an odd way, it's a relief.
The tension in the room has dissipated. Finally, we can all do something. Matron starts with compressions. I order for the adrenaline to be given. We shock him once, twice, 3 times. A nurse has his wife mute now with shock in the corner, keeping her upright and away from the bed. It's not working, but we all knew this would be the outcome. This is a man whose body has been ravaged by something, but we don't know what yet. Our arms tire. Matron looks at me questioningly. I shake my head. We have done everything we can and should. To keep going now would be to inflict unnecessary torture on the body of a dead man. After 52 minutes, I make the order. Everybody stop. Enough.
Oh, what a powerful scene. Gosh, we really feel that adrenaline, I think, as readers. Thank you so much. I wonder, Fíona, if I can ask you to, would you be able to read from Boys Don't Cry?
I read the opening, so this is the bit that was inspired by that tweet all those years ago. Okay, this is from Finn. Ice cream, any flavour, chocolate, banana, strawberry, or that one that has all 3 striped together, sandwich in a wafer. A screwball from Mr. Whippy with double sauce and sprinkles, begging Ma for euro and legging it down the concrete steps, praying that I'd get there before he left, following the music box sounds of Greensleeves or Teddy Bear's Picnic or Yankee Doodle Dandy. Being pushed in a Tesco's trolley around the back of the flats, Joe giving us all a shot but letting me stay the longest, pushing me faster, spinning and laughing while crashing into the overflowing double steel bins. Mrs. O'Sullivan reading Rodal, The Witches, The Twits Matilda, out loud, putting on the voices, letting me borrow them after and never asking for them back. My red Transformer, the one Dad got me for my birthday, even with its left wheel missing and scraped off face, it was still my favourite. Swimming in the sea at Dollymount Stand, making sandcastles and kicking them down, poking up the washed up jellyfish with a stick and standing on the dead ones. Ma, warming my pyjamas on the bedroom rad, tucking me in, making sure to plug in my Stormtrooper nightlight, always. Joe, flying down Captain's Hill with me on the handlebars. Joe, sneaking me into 15's films at the Plex with plastic bags of popcorn, fizzy worms and Coke. Joe, sharing his headphones and turning up the volume when Da took chunks out of Ma. I still wish they'd let Da visit. I wish they'd let me home. I wish they'd serve Big Macs here instead of cabbage, mash and ham. Dr. Kennedy said to write it all down. The things I miss the most, it's supposed to be part of the process. Help me transition, but trying to fit everything in that's busting out the top of my head is sending me mental. Plus, nobody has come out and said it yet. Not the nurses, not Dr. Kennedy, not Ma. But Joe asked me if I was afraid, and that's when I knew. So that's it, short and sweet.
I love it. I love the chapters. They're so short but full of punch that you just can't wait to turn to the next one. So it's a book that I found myself, I had to slow myself down to savor it because, you know, I want to know more, but it is the dialogue, especially, we mentioned the dialogue earlier, and that was something that always struck me about this, even in those first drafts, that the dialogue, it's you're so tuned in to how people speak, and you really capture their world, the world of Dublin. And even though I'm not from Dublin, I'm from Belfast, but still there were so many phrases there that I was like, oh, that's right, that's just pitch perfect. And I actually wanted to ask, you know, was there anything in the editing process that they sort of said, could you explain what this means? Because I knew what it meant and people in Ireland knew what it meant, but you know, sometimes I just, yeah, I did wonder if you had any pushback, or how they felt about the dialogue.
The whole way throughout, they've been phenomenal, actually. Like, there was nothing at all in it, because that was one thing that I was really worried about, because I wanted to be really honest and authentic, and you know, that's part of it. If it was sort of toned down a bit, I did have an agent count the number of fucks in it, and when I was looking for representation, so, and they wanted me to change it into third person to tone it down, but sure, that's not what the book is, you know. So that was really important to me, that it's a very authentic voice. There was only one thing. So the copy editor that I had was incredibly sensitive. She was fabulous, because that was another thing I was worried about, you know, just that the rhythm of it would be lost, because it's so, it's in the vernacular and it's very heavily dialogue driven.
Yeah.
Like if little things were changed, the rhythm would be off, the rhythm of the speech would be off, which is really important to make sounds. There was only one part where it was questioned to leave it in or not, and that was when they're in the pub and the L ones are bet into their leopard print. So it was trying to explain what did the bet into mean. So I explained it and it stayed. So it's basically, you know, trying to squeeze yourself into your leopard skin dress. But that was the only thing that was questioned. The rest was, and there was no hassle keeping it there either. So I was just really lucky in that regard that I was allowed the space to leave it as authentic as it was. So I was really,
I'm so pleased,
really grateful for that.
Yeah, no, I'm hugely grateful as well that that's there, because it, as a reader, I don't think we always need to know. I think, you know, I think you can kind of read between the lines, even when it's not a phrase that you're necessarily. I mean, the idea of reading anyway is to kind of, you know, again, to understand different walks of life and different cultures. So I'm so pleased that was the case. I'm going to come to the audience just now and invite questions. So guys, you know, please do take this opportunity to ask questions. You can put them in the chat as a Q&A. But one thing, just while you're kind of thinking, I did want to know, because this is your debut, and I know from experience, my debut was a long time ago, but I know from experience you go from writing in this kind of little bubble, and then you have the experience being published, and then you have to write another novel. How has that been? Can you speak to that journey? Maybe starting with you, Christina. Are you working on another novel just now, or are you just enjoying this moment?
So I am working on another novel. The book sold in January 2020, late January 2020, and I had already started working actually on a young adult novel, which I've kind of put to one side, but I've got a draft of that. And then I started working properly on my next piece of speculative fiction last year, and it is definitely a really weird experience. And I think I'm someone who I try and kind of be I like, as much as I talk about chaos, like I do expect a lot of myself, and I found it quite difficult kind of going, I really want to get this book done, and then at the same time writing is not necessarily the easiest form of work. You know, sometimes your brain just doesn't know what it needs to know yet to write the next bit. And I think especially being in the very kind of stultifying environment of just working from home the whole time, you know, I live in a 1-bedroom flat in London. I'm literally like in the same 4 walls. It's been really difficult, I think, to write interesting, funny, insightful prose, especially dealing with ideas about the world when you're not really seeing the world, you know, not really seeing people or going out there and seeing what's going on. So it's been definitely more difficult than I'd anticipated. But I do find it quite comforting that people talk about how difficult the second book is. I find it very, very comforting. Anstey Harris, who's a really, really lovely writer, has been very lovely about End of Men, and she has kind of given me some very comforting words about book 2, which I have really taken to heart. So I'm on my way. I'm on my 3rd draft now, and I've got plenty to think about and work on with it. But it's definitely a different experience to writing your debut, which by necessity you're doing on your. I suppose also this is maybe it's different if you're in a creative writing program. I was just sitting there in my house writing on my own, hoping that what I was writing was kind of interesting or working. And I actually structurally didn't get my first novel right the first time. You know, The End of Men went through a big rewrite with my agent. So I think also negotiating that process of writing very happily with the input of people who really know what they're talking about, like agents and editors, is a very helpful additional voice to have that does change the process.
Yeah, no, that's really good. We had a panel at the festival on the second novel, which was really great actually. And I know that there's a sort of network now for debut novelists, and I think that kind of support network is really good. Because it is a different experience, especially reading new reviews on Goodreads or Amazon. People tell you not to, but you can't help it, and sometimes there's words that are maybe not so kind. Fíona, I know that you're having a wee bit of problems with your Wi-Fi. Are you able to hear me okay?
I can hear you grand. The screen is frozen. I'm just shouting at my 13-year-old to get off the Wi-Fi. It's literally now. So
I always find though, because it's the weekend, and I like last weekend I was just saying every Saturday night and Sunday my Wi-Fi just goes. So yeah, maybe it's not your 13-year-old, it's probably the internet company. What was I asking? I was asking what you were working on just, and we've got a question from one of the audience members, but yeah, I'm really curious. Are you working on another novel now, or what's your plans?
I have a first draft of book 2 done. So it's how that came about really was when book 1, when this went on submission, and it's really, really strange. So I had done absolutely everything I could with that book. So, you know, once it was out there, I said, I'm going to just get started on book 2, because if this doesn't sell, I'm prepared now to let it go. So if it doesn't sell, I'm prepared to put it in the drawer. And like, I want to be a writer, that's what I want to do. So I started straight away then on book 2, once book 1 was on submission. So I got a good chunk of it done then over the Easter break. And of course, we thought we shut down about 2 weeks before the Easter break here. And we all thought, oh yeah, we're back after the Easter holidays, you know, in this happy land of, you know, this thing that was the last 4 weeks. So yeah, I have a very rough first draft done, and I've a read through of that done, and I've made notes of big picture stuff that I want to sort of change a bit. So I'm hoping even just to get that polished up enough to send to my agent soon enough, and fingers crossed to sell it.
Oh, that's great. That's really, really good to know. Someone's asked, what authors inspire you? Can I come to you first, Christina?
So in terms of the last few years, especially, I think I found people like Naomi Alderman and MLitt and John Mandel really inspiring, people who have written books like The Power and Station 11 that I think are really kind of perfect, like, examples of speculative fiction. I also really love Anne Patchett. You know, she writes such beautiful literary fiction, and like I have so many notes on my phone of like quotes that I write down when I'm reading her books, and yet they're so gripping and propulsive. I recommend them to friends all the time, and one of my friends read The Dutch House in under 24 hours. So she's one of my favorite authors. And then I think also, like, historically, I think you can see a little bit of the influence of people like Julia Quinn, who's my favorite historical romance author, and Cecilia Ahern and Marian Keyes in my writing, because even though I'm writing quite high concept dystopian speculative fiction, there's like real big themes there of kind of love and friendship and loss, and hopefully characters that feel emotionally engaging with like bubbles of humor. So I still love and adore all of those authors, and you can really, I think those are the authors that I read primarily when I was, I think, really figuring out who I was as a writer.
Really, really interesting. Yeah, I can see those influences here. What about you, Fíona? What authors inspire you?
Yeah, there's loads of writers like that I absolutely adore. So the likes of, when I was growing up, was all Maeve Binchy, Marian Keyes. Like, absolutely love Roddy Doyle, Maggie O'Farrell, Sarah Moss, Kevin Barry. I'm always drawn to that real conversational style. I love a short book as well, you know, and just that sort of centered around the everyday, but that uses that sort of vernacular. So I remember the sort of turning point for me as a writer was when I read Donal Ryan's A Spinning Heart, and just that and saying, this is it. It's the beauty in the language of the everyday. So that was like a light bulb moment for me when I read that book, that there is beauty in the everyday people and the everyday language. So yeah, I'd say my biggest inspiration.
I love that Marian Keyes is loved your book. Yeah, just here she says beautiful. That's wonderful. We've got a wee question about how are you finding the marketing and publicity process? Is it different to what you expected? Should we come to you, Christina?
I have to say it's more fun and also more tiring than I thought it would be. It's been like genuinely really joyous getting to kind of actually talk to readers and talk to people that have read your book and want to kind of know more about it. It's very, you know, these characters that live in your head for so long, and it's like just you and your agent, your editor, you know who they are. And so having people tell me that they like Amanda McLean, or, you know, their thoughts on Dawn, is actually a really magical thing. And then I think also I just didn't really, I remember I got to the end of publication week. My book was published on the 29th. And then I remember getting to kind of the Friday night, and I just hit an absolute wall that I hadn't really expected, because it is a lot to get. It's this kind of lifetime experience of seeing the book and going to a bookshop and being like, okay, that's it. Like, I'm a published author now. So it's been wonderful, and I'm very lucky to work with just brilliant people at HarperCollins as well, who there's a wonderful team of women who just do absolute magic in terms of helping to kind of navigate the process. And I remember asking lots of questions over the last few months. So yes, it's been a joy.
That's wonderful. What about you, Fíona?
I found it very overwhelming, actually, and like that, just not expected. And like what you were saying, Christina, not expecting how much outside of the actual publishing the book that you have to do. And I completely underestimated the level of exhaustion that you're going to have. And I was in work for the week as well. And then you're coming back and you're trying to do different bits and pieces. So like that just utter exhaustion where you're like, what's going on? I didn't expect it. And I think because I didn't expect the reaction that I got either, I'd sort of separated myself. It's a bit like what you were saying, Caroline. It's sort of, you're writing away and it's private. It's very private. And I was able to separate the book from myself. And then once it's published, it's you together. And like, I find the promotion aspect of it, even on Twitter and things like that, quite difficult, even though getting the reactions and everything is phenomenal. Like hearing readers' responses and people respond to the book has been like, it's a really humbling experience. And, you know, I'd much prefer to be in person, in like, you know, chatting in a room with people about the book, or at a library event chatting about the book, than trying to do it through social media. I find that quite awkward. I think maybe it's just me that finds it awkward. Like I think it's probably because I'm missing that human connection anyway. Like I'd much prefer to be able to chat with readers in person, and hopefully we'll be able to do that soon enough.
Yeah, I think it is weird to have to move into a space where you're shouting about your book and promoting your book, because as authors, you know, most of our job is just the writing, and that's solitary. So to suddenly have to become a salesperson is a whole different skill set. So I don't think that's uncommon at all. Yeah. I think we might have time just for one more question. If anyone has one, I mean, I have many questions, but I just wanted to make sure that I give the audience a chance. Can I ask my question then? Has there been any interest in making these into films?
Not yet.
Not yet? Oh, anyway, I'm sure that's not far away, but they're both so filmic that I'm dying to see them both on the screen. So what about you, Christina?
Yeah, so the film rights have sold, which is really exciting. So that happened back in March last year, and then we're kind of in the very, very slow process of trying to figure out whether it can actually be made or not. So fingers crossed.
Great.
Yeah, it takes a long time, and even if there are options, you know, things can happen. But I think they're both so brilliant, and they're both beautiful. I think as books, even if they don't make it into a screen translation, I think that they're excellent as books. Well, I just wanted to say thank you both for this wonderful event that you've done, for your readings, and just congratulate you on these books. It's a very exciting time. So I hope you're both just, you know, full of joy over the reception of the books and how beautifully they've been produced as well. They've got such gorgeous covers. I didn't mention that previously. The covers are just the colors in this, and the beautiful red and black. I saw on Instagram, Christina, I think you wore red for your publication day, and I thought, oh yeah, it's such a brilliant color for the book. So wonderful. This has been super interesting. So thank you both, and good luck for whatever you're going to work on next. I hope it all turns out really, really well. So thank you for chatting to me. Thank you to our audience for your questions, and have a lovely evening.